You can do it.
You can come from behind. You can do it.
If you are involved with the news or watching Facebook or listening to Facebook or on Facebook or Twitter, all these social media devices, you know how easy it is to have judgment passed upon one person or another. And it seems to be happening more and more all the time. Lee Strobel, before he became a Christian, was an atheist. And at that time, he was a reporter for the Chicago Tribune in the States. When he was investigating Christianity, he looked for evidence that would support his beliefs. And in so doing, he wrote a book called The Case for Christ. And at the start of that case, he gave the story of a policeman who was involved in a domestic dispute and tried to break up a fight between two people. During the course of that dispute, he was shot. Now, one of the people that was involved in the dispute was a known felon. He had been previously convicted for shooting a policeman. He had been seen earlier with a gun, and the gun was found very nearby. His fingerprints were on it. It was the same gun, same caliber of gun that caused the policeman's wound. And based upon this evidence, which was felt to be pretty airtight, this person named Dixon was arrested and convicted. However, it later came to be found out that the policeman himself had an illegal gun in his pocket. And during the course of the fight, that was the gun that went off when he was bent over, and he actually shot himself in his abdomen. The person who had been convicted was totally innocent. And the reason I tell the story is the fact that one has to look at the evidence totally and be sure not to judge prematurely. In fact, we are told that very clearly in Matthew 7, verse 1 and 2, and it says, "Don't judge, so that you are not judged. For with what judgment you judge, you also shall be judged. And with what means you dish out, it shall be given back to you the same." Now, if we're not to judge, it makes it difficult in one way, because every day we undergo judgments. I mean, decisions are judgments of a sort. But they affect only you. You have to make the right or the wrong decision every day. Decision to get up or stay in bed, to go to work or stay home, go to school or stay home, come here or stay home. There are all sorts of decisions we will make, but these aren't really the judgments that are talked about. There are also opinions. People have opinions. People have opinions about each other. Sometimes they're justified, sometimes they aren't, but they're still opinions. And providing they're your own opinion based upon your own experience, your own knowledge, they can be correct for you. But that's still not the same as a judgment, because they again affect really only you, as long as you keep them to yourself and don't make it into a judgment against somebody else. Because rarely do we have all the facts about why people do things or don't do things. And if we did make judgments based upon the facts that we have, the world as we know it might have been entirely different than it is. The only one who has all the facts is God himself. And if you look back through the Bible, and particularly the Old Testament, many of the patriarchs, if we had to judge them, would never have survived or lived long enough to do what they accomplished in their lives. Abraham was one. He committed adultery. By our laws, that's wrong. By God's laws, it's wrong. But yet, God honored him eventually in life and made him the father of great nations. Because it says in Genesis that Abraham's faith was accredited to him for righteousness. Moses was a murderer. Again, by our laws and by God's law. That's wrong. But yet Moses was used by God to free the Egyptians from slavery. Solomon was an adulterer, a polygamist. He had over 700 wives. Can't picture that, but anyway. He had over 700 wives. Many of them were pagan. And God had given strict instructions not to mix, for the Israelis to mix with pagans. And yet Solomon was blessed by God. David was a murderer, a conspirator, adulterer. Yet he was the greatest king that Israel ever had. And he was blessed by God throughout his life. Ruth was a pagan woman from Moab. And yet she was honored by God when she returned with Naomi to Jerusalem and became actually an ancestor of David and also, in a way, of Christ. All these people were guilty of problems and of crimes which, according to secular law, would have cost them almost everything. Yet God honored them. Why? The commonality of all these people was one, that in spite of their problems, in spite of what they did, in spite of their actions, they never really lost faith in God. And they never really turned away from God the way that many people who commit crimes or who sin do. See, the problem of passing judgment is that we are all sinners. No one is excluded. And the Bible says if you commit one sin, you're guilty of committing all sins. You break one commandment, you break them all. So none of us are any less guilty in God's eyes than anybody else. This is why Solomon, in all his wisdom, at the very end of the Bible, the very end of his books, the very end of his age, said this, that this is the end of the matter. Everything has been heard. The main thing is to fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every work into judgment, every hidden thing, whether it is good or whether it is evil. All over the world, people make judgments against different people for various reasons. Sometimes it's because they're disabled. Sometimes it's because they don't look the same way as others. Different color, different sexual orientation, whatever. We all pass judgment, but none of us know the whole story. Only God knows that. And we may be surprised someday at who is really in heaven. C.S. Lewis said that the person who we think is one of the worst people around may have a closer walk with God in his heart than those people who attend church every day, every Sunday, and just sit in the pew. So as we go through life, and we're thinking of what our opinions or how other people are, don't judge. If you have an opinion, that's fine. The Bible doesn't say you have to like everybody, but it does say you should love everybody. So, as you go on social media, read the news, listen to what's going on, before one makes judgments about other people. Maybe this should give you something to think about.